an example of how to apply functional programming principles to the modeling domain. And so we get to listen to Simon again, and he gets to tell us about financial engineering, which we are all very familiar with.
All right. Well, so this is a very different domain than we've been talking about before. But you'll see in this talk a lot of common material with Satnam's talk about hardware, because this is about an embedded domain-specific language for describing financial contracts or financial instruments. It's joint work that I did now quite a while ago with Jean-Marc Ibert, who was then working for Société Générale, which you've probably heard about recently because they lost huge amounts of money. But Jean-Marc left them several years ago, before they lost the huge amounts of money, and started his own company, Lexify, to commercialize the ideas that I should be telling you about. The other co-author here is Julian Seward, who many of you may know because of his work on Valgrind, an instrumentation tool for instrumenting x86 binaries. So he left Microsoft Research, worked for ARM for a bit, and then since then he's been doing free software with Valgrind. So here we are. So here's the idea. It's kind of connection between this financial domain, which Jean-Marc knew all about, and programming language design and implementation, which Julian and I knew about. And we kind of met at a functional programming conference. And Jean-Marc had been working with trying to describe financial instruments that have these strange names. So these, I don't know what a straddle is anymore, or a swallow, but they're all very important things if you're in the finance market. And there's rather a lot of them. So there's a big menagerie of different kinds of financial instruments you can exchange with people. And he was interested in describing them in a precise way. And so the interesting thing was we used the standard tools from the programming language world and applied them in this very different context. And so perhaps the big message that I'm trying to get across in this talk to you is that actually it's possible to take functional programming ideas and apply them in a pretty concrete way in rather implausible sorts of domains. So let me start to get a bit more precise about this then. What we would like to do is to have a precise description of a financial contract, like an option, and we'd like to take a single description and use it for many different purposes. So we'd like to use it for explaining to the back office people who should pay who and when. We'd like to feed it into some kind of valuation engine so that we know what it's worth and what we should sell it for. And we might even like to generate legal documentation, actually English language text, that lawyers can sign. And we'd like to do all of this from one specification. So rather than jump straight in with financial contracts, I'm going to start off with a more domestic analogy, which is making puddings. So puddings, desserts, right, what you have after lunch. So here we're going to make a little language to give a precise description of a pudding. And from this single description, I'm going to want to do several tasks: compute its sugar content, generate instructions to make it, estimate how long it takes to make, and that kind of thing. So one approach you can do is simply to list all the puddings. Now, this approach is very popular with cookery authors, right? Because they get to sell a lot of books. They write book 1, which has 100 puddings in it, and then they can produce book 2, which has another 100. And this process can iterate. So you can list all the puddings and how to make them and the sugar content and so forth. And this is really the way the financial market works. That really all those strangely named things exist in software. So if you want to do a swaption with somebody, then some poor guy in the basement of Société Générale has coded up what swaptions do explicitly. And there's a big zoo of these things. But what we're going to do instead is to say, for each pudding, we're going to, what we're going to do instead is to define a set of building blocks or pudding combinators which we can use to combine together to make small puddings to make big puddings by combining smaller ones. So combinator is just a long word meaning building brick that we combine together. And then we'll define puddings in terms of these combinators, and the idea is then we can calculate the sugar content of a given pudding, not by doing it one by one for each pudding, or one at a time, but rather by giving a rule that says for each combinator what its sugar content is, and that means that I can compute the sugar content of any pudding, no matter how complicated. That's the idea. So here's an example. So this is a creamy fruit salad pudding, and it has the on top of combinator that takes two sub-puddings and layers them physically on top of each other, and the whipped combinator that takes a sub-pudding and whips it up, and the take combinator that says has an amount. This is a kind of leaf thing here, an amount and a quantity of stuff. So take a pint of cream, whip it, and put it on top of a mixture of. So a mixture is the combinator that screws it all up together. And then we have chopped apples and optional. So this is interesting, this optional one, because it's not something you do to a pudding like mixing it. It's more that you can have this, or you can. So you can see these combinators have different flavours, right? Some of them are no pun intended. This optional thing does a different kind of thing than chopping, which does something, or mixing, which does something. Okay. So I've drawn it as a diagram here, but in fact, of course, you can write it down in textual form. That's what programming people are trained to do. So here is a textual form of the diagram in which my fruit salad is the on top of a topping and a main part. So the topping is this left part, and the main part is the right bit, and the topping is, well, a whipped of a take of a pint and cream, and so forth. You get the idea? So my notation is parent applied to child, or function applied to arguments, and I'm using the Haskell notation for function application, which is the space is the apply operator. Okay? So you can, and this is just like my spreadsheet example, right? I can switch these lines around. It's just a purely functional program, of course. So what I've really done is I've made a domain-specific language here by choosing my vocabulary of on top of and whipped and so forth. I've made a domain-specific notation for describing puddings. Okay, that's the idea. So far, so good. Of course, as before, I would be very pleased if you would ask questions as we go along. All right. So that's the light stuff. So now you've digested your pudding, we'll move on to money. So here is the simplest sort of contract you can have, which says, I will give you a certain amount of money on a particular date. That's a pretty good contract to have with someone if the other person is the one giving you the money. It's called a zero coupon bond, ZCB. Finance people have complicated names for things, so I'm going to write it down on this. So C1 is going to be the name of my contract, and it has type contract. So double colon means has type, as before. So this now really is Haskell notation. So C1 is a zero coupon bond, and what is the type of zero coupon bond? So it takes a date, a floating point number, and a currency, and gives you a contract. What is a contract? Well, it's this thing that we're going to build, right? It's like the puddings. So ZCB is like one of these leaf puddings, the take three apples kind of thing that occurred at the leaves of my tree here. Right? It's not a way to combine contracts into bigger ones. This is like an elementary contract. Though, as we shall see, we're going to build the zero coupon bond out of yet simpler contracts in just a second. Okay? So it takes three arguments: a date, an amount, and a currency, and gives a contract. And these contracts are all between two people. Right? So me and Thomas might have this contract between us, and this means that, beg pardon, and that means that, on the 1st of January, then Thomas will give me £100. Thank you, Thomas. Okay. And these guys in the blue boxes are going to be my combinators. Now, what else? How can I combine contracts? So a very good way to combine contracts, especially if you have these zero coupon bonds, is with the AND combinator. So AND takes two contracts as its argument and combines them into a single bigger contract, and it's like the on top of combinator for puddings. It means if I own C1 and C2, then I own C1 and C2. Right? So here I might have two zero coupon bonds from Thomas in which he pays me two sums of £100 a year apart. Very good, yes?
Is it important to tell the direction?
But what about the direction? So I think the convention is here that if I own a contract, then these zero coupon bonds are money that comes to me, right? So that's right. So I might own it, and you might give it to me. So indeed, we need to say which of us is the owner, right? But we don't, and we can change the sense within a contract like this. Give. So give inverts a contract, inverts the ownership of a contract. So if I own C1 and give C2, that means that I get all the benefits of C1 and you get all the benefits of C2. Right? So give is like negation and is like addition. So give, of course, is a contract combinator with the type contract, arrow contract. And it just inverts the roles of the two parties. Does that make sense? And in every case, of course, I can draw it as a tree, or in my previous, I think the arrows were the other way around in my last talk, but it said, you look, just looking upside down, I thought it looked the same. Now, now once we've started to build contracts out of smaller pieces, it's not long before you want to abbreviate your notation. And that's very easy to do. You can just define a new function. So this now is a new function defined, as it were, by a broker at his desk. Sitting there in SocGen, he can type in this definition. Well, he would if SocGen had bought Lexify's product. So ANDGIVE is a function that takes two contracts and delivers a contract. And what does it do? It takes contracts U1 and U2 and returns U1 and give of U2. So it's a pretty simple function. But if you find yourself typing U1 and give U2 a lot, you might like to abbreviate to ANDGIVE. So in effect, this gives the power to, as it were, end users to build more complicated contracts by combining whatever simpler ones are already provided. But once you've done that, there's no difference between ANDGIVE and ZCB or GIVE, right? They're all just combinators that you can use to build contracts. So one person can write a new contract as a function like this and hand it off as a library to somebody else who can then use it as if it was a primitive supplied one. Okay, so this is how it's pretty simple for the end users, even people who are just using this stuff, to construct their own libraries of contracts, in effect. Okay, now, I promised you that ZCB is a rather complicated contract. It has 3 whole arguments. That seems rather a lot, right? So let's see if we can decompose it into some smaller things. And we can. Here it is. Oh, so I've done the decomposition for you into 3. There's 3 contracts here. 1, scale k, and at. And here's what they mean. 1 means, if I own the contract 1, that means that I get 1 unit of this currency immediately. Right? So the moment that the contract is established, I'm owed the money by Thomas. Right? At says when you acquire an at contract, at takes a date and a contract and produces a contract. When I acquire an at contract, what that means is that at the subsequent moment, at the specified date, I acquire the underlying contract. So at t of something, if I acquire the contract at t of something, that means that I don't get anything now, but at time t, I'll get the inner contract, and then whatever the inner contract means happens right away. Okay? And then scale, as you may imagine, just scales up the contract. All the rewards and obligations of the contract get scaled up by the specified float. So I think you can now see that I take 1 unit of currency k, right, scale it up by the size f, and then do an at thing on it, and now I've got a 0 coupon bond. But I built it out of 3 more primitive things that might be independently useful later in their own right. Make sense? So that's the name of the game in this domain-specific language game, is to take things, to start off with big Lego bricks, and you say, maybe I can carve them into smaller bricks, and then I can put them together in new ways. And it's like a jigsaw puzzle. It's very fun. Okay. Now, I think I've said all this. The really important thing about this slide is to remark that the moment of acquisition of a contract, the moment you acquire a contract, is very important, right? So acquiring a contract at TU at some time earlier than t means that at the later time t, you acquire the underlying contract U. But we also have to say, what happens if we were to acquire at TU at some time later than t? What would happen then? Well, we thought about this a bit, and we ended up defining it to mean you get nothing. So this contract is worthless after time t. Okay. Good. So we're building up our contracts now. So I'm now going to introduce two new ideas in sequence. The first is the notion of an observable, and the second is the notion of an option and choice. So here's observables first. Now, if you run a ski resort like Aura, you might worry about there being no snow. Right? So people who run ski resorts take out insurance policies, they're called weather derivatives, that say, they approach somebody and say, look, if it doesn't snow, will you give me some money? Right? And the person says, okay, but you give me some money now. So typically, it's like an insurance policy. I give the bank some money now in exchange for the possibility that there's no snow. They give me a lot more money later. Right? And so it's something like this. Pay me $1,000 times the number of inches of snow minus 10. Right? So if there's, it's probably the other way around, but this would say, this would be a summer resort would have an option like this, right? So if there's too much snow, you get paid a lot of money, okay? So that's what a weather derivative is. How are we going to specify a contract like that? Well, so so it's something like this, sort of at the 1st of January 2002, we want to scale this amount, $1, by a scale factor. But what is the scale factor? Well, the scale factor depends on the value of some real-world quantity at the moment of acquisition. So remember, at here delays the acquisition of the inner contract until the 1st of January. So at the moment we acquire this scale contract, that's when we want to sample it. So the idea is that scale factor here is going to be a value of type observable float, not just a float, because remember, if it had type float, then it would have a single fixed value forever, right? Its value would be 4.7, and remember this is functional programming, so its value would be always 4.7. But an observable float, you should think of it as being kind of the name, almost like a time-varying value. You could think of this as a function from time to float. That would be a good way to think of observable float. So snow is going to be the depth of snow. They think of it as a function from time to depth of snow. Take that, subtract 10 off it, multiply it by 1,000, and now I've got a time-varying value that's the payoff of this contract. Okay? And so scale now, the real scale, my previous scale was a scale K, right? And he took a fixed float, right? But my new scale, this scale without the K, takes an observable float, meaning a time-varying observable, and the comment says what it is: scale contract by the value of the observable at the moment of acquisition. Right? So notice this is still very declarative. It says you still think, I mean, the moment you acquire it, you look at the value. I don't have to talk about assigning to this. This is a single value, this scale factor, but the value is a function of time. Yeah, Thomas.
Is it important in which order you say the at and the scale factor?
Oh, is it important whether you say at of scale or scale of at? Very, very important. Oh, yes. Because look at this. Scale a contract by the value of the observable at the moment of acquisition. Right? So if you put the scale outside, then at the moment we exchange this contract, we set it up, back in, June, we'd sample the snow then. Right? But remember, at delays the acquisition of the contract inside until the specified date, right? So by putting the scale inside, that says we're going to acquire the scale contract at this date, and that's the difference, right? So it's you're quite right. It's a little subtle. You have to be careful when you're writing a contract, but we know that. Yeah.
So this is very declarative, but it's not very functional, is it?
Well, now we get into a kind of what's the word? Theological matters, I suppose. What is functional? But for me, this is perfectly functional. Yes. So scale factor doesn't have a different times. I mean, it's not when the program executes, it doesn't change. You can imagine that the way to think of it is that scale factor is a function from time to float, and it has that function doesn't change. Right? It's like if I say the sine function is a function from float to float. The sine function is the sine function forever. Of course, if you apply it to different floats, you get different sine values. Right? And it's just the same here. If you apply the scale factor at different times, you get different answers. So that's the way to think of it.
So why not make time an explicit parameter for?
So I could say. I mean, it could say scale factor has type time arrow float, right? But that's making it a bit concrete. Right, then, I don't want to commit to that representation for observables.
Isn't that end up being convenient when you're modeling sort of how to device this thing?
I know actually it's much more convenient to have this than to have it modeled as a function. Now, of course, somewhere else, deep inside the implementation, you might have a type synonym that says type observable of alpha equals time arrow alpha. But you might also have something else entirely, like type observable of alpha is sequence of values of alpha, or sequence of time alpha pairs, or you could have a variety. That's an implementation matter. Right? This keeps it abstract. We don't have to. So the idea is the user of this system isn't really going to think about how it's represented. The time arrow float idea is just to get a kind of mental intuition about what it means at all. And once you get used to it, then you stop thinking about that again. That was just sort of scaffolding. Okay? So that's observables. And so here are the types now. So snow is an observable of type float. Date, well, what's the date? The date today, that's a time-varying value, isn't it? You know, today it's the 21st of February, and tomorrow it'll be the 22nd. So it's a time-varying value of type observable date. It's quite helpful to have a constant, right, which is a time-varying value that doesn't vary. So it has type A to observable of A. And we want all the arithmetic operations, like multiplication and division and comparison operations, we'd like to lift from being float to float to float to being observable float to observable float to observable float. And Haskell actually makes it particularly easy to do that. So there we are, that's observables. Now, another thing you might want to do is to trigger the acquisition of a contract by an event. So this contract says when there is the snow comes late in the year, you owe me money, right? So it's like a late snowfall. That's what you're insuring against. So how does this go? So late snow is a Boolean observable, right? So it's a Boolean value that varies with time. Different times it might be true, different times it might be false. And here is how I say date. Remember, date is a observable date. It varies over time. So date is bigger than the 1st of August 2003. I have to say const because this is an observable and that would have been just a date and greater than wouldn't have liked that. So maybe a dynamically typed language you wouldn't have had to put const in. All right. And snow is bigger than 100, so that's late snow. And this when is another contract combinator that takes a Boolean observable and a contract, and it says if you acquire the contract when OC, that means that at the first time at which O becomes true, you acquire C. That's the meaning. So the nice thing about these combinators is they all have very compact English language specifications, at least. Okay, so much for observables. Now a quick thing about choice. So one of the big things about real financial derivatives is that they involve choice. You can say you have the possibility of acquiring this, so you can choose not to, or you can choose to. So, and there's two kinds of choice, it turns out. One is to choose which of two things you acquire, and the other is to choose when you acquire it. So here's a European option. Don't know why it's called European, but it is. And it says that at a particular date, you have the option of acquiring a contract or not. Right? Now, the contract that you acquire might be something like you get 5 Microsoft shares and you pay $50. That would be a good deal. So this you thing might be itself an and contract. You know, you get something and you pay something. But here this or says, or you can choose the zero contract, which means nothing. It doesn't mean there are no obligations for either party. So this or contract says you are going to acquire, you must immediately choose. Immediately you acquire the or contract, you must choose either C1 or C2. Okay? Zero the worthless contract. So I hope now this definition of European, which is not primitive, it's just a library definition, here it is, makes sense, because it says at the time T, you must choose whether you want zero or whether you want U. And U, as I say, would typically be itself be a compound contract.
Simon,
Make sense? Yeah.
calling zero a worthless contract kind of misses part of it because it's also a no obligation contract.
That's right. Yes, it's no obligations to either party. So yes, from your point of view, it's worthless, but fortunately, from his point of view, it's worthless too. Right. Thank you. Yes. So maybe it should be called
a no obligation.
No obligations. Yes. So that's a European option, which is so European options are relatively straightforward. At a particular date, you get to choose, but Americans like things more complicated. So they get to choose contracts at a variety of times. And here it is. So the option to acquire 10 Microsoft shares for $100 any time in a range of times. Ooh. So now you can watch the share price, you see, and any time you like, you can say, yes, I'll take it now. It doesn't have to be a particular time. You get this sort of time range. So we need one new combinator to express this American option, which has this type: observable bool. So it takes a Boolean valued observable, and any time this observable is true, you are allowed to acquire the underlying contract, but you don't have to. So a golden handcuff contract might be any time, that's this thing, in which the date is bigger than T1 and smaller than T2, you can acquire shares. And shares mean you can choose either to do nothing at all, right? I choose whether to acquire this or not. So that is, you can, as it were, cancel the contract by exercising and then choosing 0. Or you can spend some money and get some Microsoft shares. And here, where the shares were treated as a kind of currency, rather like dollars. Okay, so this is a kind of choice, the two kinds of choice. The which to acquire, that's the or, and when to acquire it is the anytime. And notice that these things compose together, right? We're making contracts out of contracts. So the European contract, for example, I could make a European contract exercisable at type T1, which, if you choose to acquire the contract, the underlying contract, you get another European contract exercisable at the later time T2. Right? So this does not exist typically in the code base of major banks, right? But a broker might want to sell it to somebody, and then it's very nice to be able to whip it up quickly. In fact, this is one of the reasons that Jean-Marc was interested in this stuff in the first place, was that he said the guys on the trading floor sell contracts all the time with their counterparties in other banks, which our system is incapable of describing. So what they do is they sell something and they talk on the phone and they exchange maybe a bit of paper, but what they tell the computer is the nearest approximation to what they've actually sold. And so that means that what the computer thinks the obligations of the bank are may be different than what the obligations really are, just because the computer is a year or two behind in the range of financial products that are actually being traded. So this is bad, as we now know. So I can't claim that the current financial crisis is a result of the lack of combinators in banks, but it could be a contributory factor. All right, so here's the story so far. We've made, with a fairly small number of combinators, we've described really quite a wide variety of contracts. And this is where it was good to have Jean-Marc, because this was his life, right, describing this stuff. And he said, with this lot, we can do maybe not absolutely everything, but really a lot of all the kind of contracts that are bought and sold. So they had some confidence that this wasn't just just an academic exercise. We'd really reached quite a large variety of these possible contracts. So now we have to think, what are we going to do with these things? So, in particular, we have these informal descriptions of what the various combinators mean, but we might like a more precise description. But what does it really mean? And programming language people all set out to do this. We call it semantics, which sounds complicated, but in this case turned out to be fairly easy. So we want to do some kind of semantics of financial contracts. What might that mean? So I'm going to show you two. So one particular kind of semantics that a contract has, actually a rather important semantics, if you have engaged in a contract, is what it's worth, right? Its value. So it's a bit difficult to figure out its value. So and you might like to figure out its value in a modular way. So going back to the way that people describe programming languages, what they do is they give it a so-called denotational semantics, in which the denotation, nice long word, is some kind of value that expresses what that program means. And so the two programs are equivalent, we might say here, have the same value, if they have the same denotation. And this semantics you want should be compositional in the sense that the denotation of a compound program, P1 plus P2, say, should be gotten by somehow combining together the denotations of P1 and P2. So I'm going to show what that means in terms of my sugar content. So what's the sugar content of the on top of pudding? Well, it's the sugar content of pudding 1 plus the sugar content of pudding 2, right? So the sugar content of this compound thing was obtained by combining the sugar content of the sub-puddings. And the sugar content of a whipped pudding, well, whipping doesn't change the sugar content, so just the sugar content of P. And similarly here, for Q, I might have to multiply Q by the sugar content of the ingredients and so forth. So the nice thing is that we have one line here for each combinator, and that's it. Once you've done that, you can compute the sugar content for any pudding, no matter how complicated. That's what the compositional semantics means. It means that you do one line per construct, and you're done. Does that make sense? That's what we want. So, what are we going to do for values, for contracts? Well, so at this point, you have to go and look up in the books about what it means to value a financial contract, and there's lots of books about this that I, frankly, don't understand. So I'm going to give you my kind of half-baked version of what valuing a contract means, which is probably good, because I suspect that it'll, if I gave you the true version, you'd be even more confused. I certainly was. So the idea is that the denotation of a contract, that is, the thing we're going to compute as its value, is going to be a random process. And the way that I think of a random process is as a kind of function from time to distribution. So it's the value of things that are near at hand. We kind of know, we know the interest rate today, say, so we can figure out the value of things tomorrow pretty closely. But the value of things in 10 years' time is much more difficult to compute or to predict. And so our uncertainty increases with time, and that's what this wedge shape is meant to mean. So the further we go through time, the broader the distribution of values that you might get. So you're not going to get one value for these contracts. You're going to get, at any particular time, you're going to get a distribution of values. So the way to think of this semantics is, the semantics takes a contract and gives you a random process. And a random process is a function from time to random variable, and a random variable means more or less a distribution. Okay, so if anybody's serious about probability, probably knows that this is complete nonsense, but it's a vague approximation to the real thing. Anybody care to correct me on this score? Oh, it's a relief. Now, so it turned out with this kind of idea, we could then pretty straightforwardly write a semantics of our combinators, right? That says, well, so you can see this. What's the random process for C1 and C2? Well, it turns out you can add random processes, so it's just the sum of their thing. For give, you can just negate it. For when, oh, that's interesting. It turned out that you had to do something called discounting, as I'll show you, and any time is the most complicated. But these operators here are standard from the books, right? You look up in the books, and they have a Snell operator is a well understood, probability, mathematical, financial kind of thing. So, the idea was that the stuff that we had in our more or less purely syntactic world turned out to map to mathematical operations that were well understood in that domain, and that's also a common thing that happens. And then once we've written a line for each contract, we're all finished. So we were happy. But of course, this gives you a kind of mathematical notation over here. It still doesn't let you evaluate, actually find numbers for the values. But it does let you figure out, it might like to prove some things. Like, so any time O, any time of C, with the same observable, you might intuitively think that would be the same as any time O of C, and in fact it is. But how do you prove that? How do you prove that? Well, you can show that Snell of something is the same value. You do the maths. Somebody else does the maths. You get this guy to do it, and sure enough. So now you've got an identity, a sort of algebra of operations that work on these random processes. And this is a kind of way of justifying, if you like, equivalences between what were previously just syntax. I mean, how would I previously have justified this claim? Well, I could have argued in an informal way, but really all I had before was syntax, and now I've got some more principled means for saying which two programs are the same. And once you've done that, now you can start to build implementations that take a contract, apply this semantic function to give you a random process, which is still, the random process isn't something that evolves inside the computer. It still has a sort of representation of some kind of data structure. Well, you might imagine it's the syntax tree for this guy, if you like. And so a compiler can now manipulate and perhaps transform these using algebraic laws that are true for the Snell and discount and all those kind of things, to perhaps optimize it, and then you might generate some code that generates a valuation program. And I'm going to show you one particular way in which you can value things. Yeah?
The transformation need not be terminated.
This is just an optimization process. Yes, it might not terminate, I suppose. It's like an optimizing compiler. It's as long. It's not a. Yeah. Okay, so this step here, how do we value a contract once we've got its random process? How do we do it? Well, there are lots of ways of doing this, right? Really a lot. Monte Carlo and differential equations and who knows what kind of thing. I'm just going to show you a quick intuition about one way. Here it is. So what I want to do is I want to take this contract, this zero coupon bond, and I want to say, what's it worth to me to get £300, so I'm going to get £100 in 3 years' time. And I can't really do that without some model about interest rates. So somehow or other, I have to come up with a model about interest rates. So interest rates today are 5%, and in 1 year's time there'll be this, and in 2 years' time there'll be that. But of course the interest rates are also a random process, So the interest rates in 3 years' time may vary between 4 and 6% with this kind of distribution. Right? And from that, I'm going to try to figure out what my bond is worth. So the way you do it is you make, one way to do it is you can make a funny kind of binary tree, recombining binary tree here. So what you know is that a year 3, regardless of the interest rates, it's worth 100, right? It's definitely worth 100. Because look, you get paid 100 in year 3. So that's when it's worth 100. What's it worth in year 2? Well, you could, as it were, back apply the interest rate. So in year 2, interest rates are low down here. So you can say, well, that was worth £98 back here. Interest rates are higher up here, so it was worth £97 up there, right? And so because this triangle, remember, is this interest rate triangle, really. And so you discount it back, sort of averaging the pairs as you go, until you get back to today, and you say, oh, it's worth £95. This is called the Black Derman toy model. I think it's sufficient. It's not great. There are lots of better ways of doing it, but it was simple enough to implement in an afternoon. And also had a kind of cool property. So look, now this is a concrete representation of a random process, this funny tree thing. And you might wonder about it getting a bit big, because you've had lots and lots of time steps and these trees getting big. Then you might worry about how they can get big. And they can. And furthermore, sometimes you don't need all of them. So look at. So if I take a tree that looks like this, and I've carefully computed all of it, and then I say, so that's the value of a contract C. What about at T, C? Well, at T means I acquire the underlying contract at time T. So at time T, its value would be exactly this green stripe. But at earlier times, the value of at TC is not this green stuff, because at TC means that at the subsequent time T you'll acquire contract C. So what you really want to do is to take this stripe and then do that backwards discounting thing I showed you, right? So it would be a pity to have computed all this stuff in the middle here, because we're not going to need it. So it turns out that this lazy valuation mechanism that Haskell has, and that I could have ranted about this morning, but refrained, lazy valuation meant that the data structure could be evaluated incrementally, and that was very nice. Parts that are needed and not computed. So you could think of this really big tree as a single value all at once, but actually it's kind of computed on demand and never exists in memory all at the same time. So that is about the denotational semantics, right, the value of a contract. But programming languages people have also developed other kinds of semantics for languages, one of which is called operational semantics. So that operational semantics means, in a rather concrete way, how a program evolves. What might that mean for a contract? Well, it turns out it's really important. If you own this contract, the combination of two contracts, then as time evolves, let's say T1 is bigger than T2, well, after you're past T2, this one becomes worthless, right? It's paid out, and so the remaining contract, the remaining bit of the contract that you still own is just this left-hand part. So as time progresses, the contract evolves, or as choices are made, by one party or other, as you made choices about options, the contract evolves. You can think of it as a kind of amoeba. It starts big, and then as somebody makes a choice, so it collapses to a small part, and then some time goes by, so it collapses a bit more. So the contract evolves with time, and that's quite similar to the way programs evolve as they execute. And so it turns out you could write an operational semantics in a very direct way that takes contracts and evolves them, and that means that as time goes on, you always have a set of contracts that you own, and you can throw your valuation engine at it. And the valuation engine didn't need to worry about the fact that they started life as some other contract, they just evolved their way to this. So here's the idea that the contract, your sort of database of contracts, the ones that you own, live in your computer somewhere. You evolve them using this operational semantics and then feed it down this pipeline to figure out how much your bank is exposed to credit risk of one kind or another. So I guess, again, the details are not so important. I think that the big picture that I'm trying to convey is that once you do one of these domain-specific language things, if you then think of it, you say, what might the denotational semantics of this program be? What might its operational semantics be? You'll often find there's sort of connections to the real world that turn out to be quite useful, but that the sort of programming language ideas about how to think about semantics give you a good, navigational guide, a place to start, a way to think about it, if you like. So I'm not going to really say any more about operational semantics because I don't have time. But I wanted to say something very brief. There was Ulf wanted to say something about service contracts. Now, everything I've talked about up to now has been about kind of financial derivatives and that kind of stuff. But contracts, and people engage in legal agreements all the time that that are not just to do with share options. And so this is work that not done by me at all, done by a guy called Fritz Henglein, who's at DICU in Denmark. And this is taken from a paper of his last year. So he's been interested in legal contracts, but again, I think between two parties. And here is an example of such an agreement, right? That attorneys providing legal services for N hours a week and in excess of this, and paid monthly fees of that, provided you do this, that, and the other, and it's valid for this period. And he's taken exactly the same approach with a different set of combinators. So here is what this contract looks like in typewriter font. They're all just written out using his language. So he has combinators like transmit, and these double vertical bars, I think they're and, essentially. And I forget what legal is, and there's a plus, or maybe there's a plus, which I think that might be an or. Anyway, I forget the details, and they don't really matter. The point is that he has a different set of combinators, a different domain, different set of combinators, exactly the same basic idea of a single description which can be used for multiple purposes. So, that's it, really. This turned out very well. It was one of those serendipitous kind of meetings, me and Jean-Marc. So he really did the legwork because he already started to think about functional programming. So it was him showing up at a functional programming conference rather than me showing up at a finance conference that set this whole thing off. But our paper, which was ended up winning the... Oh, no, that's right. Jean-Marc made an initial product based on this that won the... So this is a finance magazine. So the computer scientists love this because computer scientists love seeing their work adopted by sort of hairy-chested financial people. That's very... they love all that. So we got good reception from the computer science audience. We weren't so sure about reception by the finance audience, right? But they liked it. So Risk Magazine made it the software product of the year. I don't know what this is worth. Probably nothing, but it was very nice. And meanwhile, Jean-Marc, more importantly, started a company. And finally, actually several years later, it's been quite a long road. He has paying customers and .NET into operation and sophisticated pricing models and all that. So he's hiring functional programmers as we speak. He's in Paris. So this is it wasn't actually straightforward to go from the idea to a product, but Jean-Marc, bless his heart, has actually done it, and it looks as if Lectify will actually sort of do this rather than that. I'm hoping it will. So there we are. So I hope it's a kind of inspiring idea that maybe trigger off. Oh, could we in our domain do this combinator library or domain-specific language idea? Thanks very much. I guess we've got a moment for questions, if anybody's. Yeah.
How difficult was it to actually specify operational semantics? Is it really mathematical?
No, how difficult was it to specify the operational semantics? Actually, it wasn't that part. Wasn't the difficult bit? Was coming up with the combinators themselves. They look simple in retrospect, but we went through an enormous number of variants before then. The operational semantics more or less says that a contract, then you say arrow, another contract, and above the arrow you write things like, pay money or time goes by. So it's quite a standard kind of operational semantics. It turned out the standard programming languages ideas worked very well for the operational semantics. That part wasn't